In this video, we'll explore a psychological paradox. Why are the deepest thinkers often the most emotionally overwhelmed? Why does their gift for understanding life often feel like a curse? And more importantly, how can they turn this pain into power? Carl Jung had an answer, one that may change the way you see your own mind forever. There is a kind of mind that feels too much, thinks too deeply, and exists quietly in a world that never truly understands it. This is the deep thinker, the philosopher of the soul, the quiet warrior of consciousness. But what if I told you that what makes them powerful is also what makes them suffer? They are not content with the surface, not satisfied with the obvious. Deep thinkers move through life like divers in an ocean, always descending beneath the waves of ordinary experience, searching for what lies hidden below. They are drawn to what others avoid: complexity, contradiction, and the uncomfortable truths buried in the human condition. And yet, what they find there is not always beautiful. Carl Jung understood this well. He once said, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. But deep thinkers, by their very nature, do not avoid. They turn inward. They ask questions no one else dares to ask. Why do I feel this way? What am I really afraid of? What does this thought mean about who I am?" To the outside world, they seem lost in thought. But they are not lost. They are investigating. They are observing the self as one might observe a storm, not to control it, but to understand its nature. They look into their past, dissect their emotions, study the architecture of their own beliefs. And this process, this deep introspection, can become both a gift and a curse, because when you look too long into the psyche begins to look back. Most people live on the surface of life. They accept roles, routines, distractions. They believe what they're told. They follow the crowd because the crowd feels safe. But deep thinkers, they peel back every layer. They question every assumption. And in doing so, they often discover that what lies beneath is not peaceful. It is chaotic, ancient, primal. Jung called this the unconscious. A vast, hidden realm filled with symbols, instincts, and archetypes. Unseen forces that drive our behavior without our awareness. The deep thinker swims in this realm. And while it offers incredible insight, it also brings exposure to things most minds are not prepared to confront. Fear, shame, the unfiltered truths of the self. It is here, in this abyss, that deep thinkers begin to experience their own minds not just as instruments of thought, but as landscapes of inner conflict. They realize that thinking is not passive. It is not neutral. Every thought is a spark. Every question has weight. Every answer brings another, deeper question. The mind becomes a labyrinth, a place where echoes of past pain resurface, where unresolved emotions hide behind intellect, and where the thinker becomes both the explorer and the haunted. Why do deep thinkers often feel exhausted? Because they are mentally traveling through emotional dimensions others don't even know exist. They are interpreting dreams, questioning the structure of reality, decoding human behavior, and constantly analyzing the why behind every what. Their awareness stretches far and wide, but with that awareness comes burden. You see, the surface-level mind protects itself with illusion. It filters out discomfort. It favors certainty over ambiguity and comfort over growth. But deep thinkers reject illusion. They dig too far for fiction to survive. And in that digging, they uncover truths that can shake the foundation of identity itself. They may begin to question everything: society, relationships, even the nature of the self. They become aware of their own masks and the masks others wear. They see the performative aspects of daily life, the unconscious patterns people repeat, the wounds that go unspoken. Jung believed that such realizations are not dangerous. They are necessary, but they are also destabilizing. To see too much too quickly can overwhelm the ego. To hold too many truths without resolution can fracture a sense of wholeness. And this is where the curse reveals itself. The deeper the insight, the heavier the weight. Deep thinkers are often praised for their intellect, their wisdom, their creativity. But what is not seen is the silent toll it takes to think so deeply. the emotional vulnerability that comes with understanding pain too intimately, the existential fatigue that comes with constantly questioning meaning, purpose, and truth. They feel everything with intensity, not just because they are sensitive, but because their thoughts are not superficial. Every idea leads to another layer. Every insight peels back another veil. They are not just living life. They are interpreting it, analyzing it, deconstructing it, and rebuilding it over and over again within themselves. And here is where many begin to feel isolated. Because while others can exist comfortably within the illusion, the deep thinker lives with the burden of knowing too much and being unable to unsee it. The truth becomes both their companion and their tormentor. They long for connection, yet struggle to find minds that speak their language. They desire peace, yet are pulled toward the unknown. They crave simplicity, but are wired for complexity. And so they continue the descent into thought, into feeling, into the silent spaces of the soul where most dare not tread. To think deeply is not just an intellectual act. It is an emotional experience, a full-body, full-soul immersion into the raw material of life. Most assume deep thinkers are cold, logical creatures, mentally consumed but emotionally distant. But the opposite is true. Their thoughts are inseparable from their feelings. Their minds are wired not just to analyze reality, but to feel it. Every thought they generate is soaked in emotional resonance. Every memory they examine brings not only understanding, but feeling. This is the curse few speak about, the unbearable intensity of emotional overload that comes with living in a mind that never stops unfolding. Carl Jung believed that all thinking is ultimately connected to images, symbols that carry with them unconscious emotional energy. When a deep thinker analyzes an idea, they are not merely turning it over in their heads like a stone. They are unpacking layers of feeling, meaning, and memory that idea contains. And this process can be exhausting. Imagine hearing someone say a casual sentence, a passing comment most would forget within seconds. But for the deep thinker, that sentence echoes. It triggers a memory. The memory triggers an emotion. The emotion triggers a chain of thoughts that spiral inward. They're not simply reacting to what was said. They're experiencing it again and again, as if their nervous system has no filter. Jung once wrote, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." The deep thinker is in a constant state of coming to consciousness. They are always waking up to something, a new truth, a hidden emotion, a subtle contradiction. And each awakening, no matter how small, carries emotional weight. Their lives become emotional palimpsests. Every layer of feeling is written over the last, but never fully erased. This is why deep thinkers are often drained by ordinary conversations. It's not that they dislike people, it's that they process so much beneath the surface. A single exchange might send them into an internal investigation that lasts for hours. Why did that tone bother me? What was the truth beneath that compliment? Did I detect resentment hidden inside that smile? Others forget. Deep thinkers relive. The emotional overload becomes a silent battle, an invisible flood they are constantly managing behind composed faces. They learn to hide the weight of their inner worlds, not out of secrecy, but because most people cannot comprehend the density of their emotional lives. They become quiet not because they lack words, but because they carry too many. To feel deeply is to live in high definition. Every joy amplified, every pain magnified. A casual moment of beauty, a piece of music, a child's laughter, a kind gesture can bring them to tears. The same sensitivity that allows them to experience bliss also opens the door to suffering. Jung understood that emotion is not separate from thought, it fuels it. He observed that many neuroses were not simply mental patterns, but emotional imbalances. The deep thinker often absorbs emotion without even realizing it. The mood of a room, the tone of a voice, the silence between words. It all enters their system like static electricity building in a storm. They are emotional barometers, sensitive to fluctuations others never notice. They detect unspoken grief, suppressed anger, subtle disappointment. And worst of all, they feel responsible for it, not in a rational sense, but emotionally, they carry what isn't theirs. They feel what isn't expressed. They take on the burdens of others unconsciously, as if their own emotional system were an open field collecting all the winds of the world. This is not weakness. It is an excess of awareness. And this awareness can sometimes lead to paralysis. When every path is weighed not just intellectually, but emotionally, choices become heavier. They cannot simply do what is practical. They must do what feels aligned, what feels true, what resonates with the hidden harmony of their inner world. But that harmony is often fragile. One disruption, one unresolved feeling, one unexpressed pain can cause the entire internal system to overload. This is why deep thinkers withdraw, not to escape, but to recalibrate, to process, to shed the emotional residue they've collected from the world. What makes this more difficult is how rarely they are understood. People may admire their insight, even envy their depth. But few realize the emotional cost of such insight. Few understand that behind the calm demeanor lies a storm of feeling, behind the wisdom, a wound, behind the clarity, an internal chaos that has been fought and endured in silence. Jung believed the task of the thinker was not to escape emotion, but to integrate it, to bring feeling and thought into unity. But this integration requires time, solitude, and inner strength. Things our world does not easily allow. The deep thinker lives in that tension. They are forced to function in a world that rewards speed while their minds move slowly, deliberately, emotionally through every layer of meaning reality presents. To think deeply is to live on the edge of the collective. The deeper the thoughts, the farther one drifts from the comforts of the herd. There is a strange solitude that follows those who carry inner depth. Not because they choose it, but because the world does not know how to meet them where they are. Carl Jung knew this reality intimately. He described the process of becoming one's true self, individuation, as a path that often requires separation from the masses. The world favors conformity. It rewards those who mirror the consensus, who play along with the stories society writes for them. But the deep thinker does not play along. They ask why, they disrupt, they unravel, and in doing so, they are often set apart. The alienation begins subtly, a moment of silence in a group conversation where their thoughts don't quite fit. A joke they don't laugh at because they see what's beneath it. A conversation they leave feeling more alone than when it began. It's not that they dislike people. It's that people often operate in a different rhythm, a more surface-level rhythm. And the deep thinker, by nature, is tuned to frequencies that most ignore. This distance becomes emotional. You begin to sense that most people are not truly listening. They hear your words, but not your meaning. They react, but do not reflect. You speak, but feel the need to translate your soul into something palatable. Watered down versions of your truth, so that others won't feel uncomfortable. And over time, this act of translation becomes exhausting. You sit in rooms full of people and feel unseen. You walk among crowds and feel unknown. You are surrounded by noise, but crave a single moment of realness. One conversation where masks are dropped and something genuine emerges. But that moment rarely comes, because depth threatens people. It exposes what they've spent years covering up. Jung called this the persona, the social mask we wear to survive in the collective. Most people become the persona. They identify with it so completely that they no longer know where the mask ends and the self begins. But the deep thinker sees through the persona. They feel its falseness. They know it's a performance. And because they refuse to fully become the mask, they become the outlier. And so, a quiet fracture begins to grow between them and the world. A spiritual tension. One that says, you do not belong to this surface. You belong to something deeper. But this deeper place is lonely. It is not crowded. It is not filled with noise and approval. It is filled with silence, introspection, and the unbearable awareness of how different you are. This is not superiority. The deep thinker does not feel better than others. If anything, they feel invisible, misunderstood, too intense, too sensitive, too much. And so they begin to retreat, not out of arrogance, But out of necessity, they begin to choose solitude, not because they dislike people, but because in solitude, they no longer have to edit themselves. But the longing for connection never leaves. They crave not just interaction, but resonance. They want to be understood in their raw, unfiltered state. They want to be met where they truly are, not where others expect them to be. They want conversations that leave echoes, not small talk that evaporates in seconds. This is the alienation Jung spoke of, the price of authenticity. The deep thinker begins to realize that their inner world is not widely shared, that most people fear silence, that most relationships are built on the comfort of not going too deep. And once you see this, you can't unsee it. You begin to notice how often people talk to fill space, not to discover truth. How often they avoid themselves by staying busy, distracted, entertained. You see the fear in their eyes when things get quiet, the panic that emerges when a real question is asked, and you start to understand why you feel alone. It's because you refuse to numb yourself the way others do. And so, the deep thinker becomes an outsider, a quiet observer, someone who walks among the world but does not fully live within it. They begin to watch more than speak, to listen more than explain, to withdraw not in despair, but in preservation. Because every moment spent pretending to be understood is a moment lost from living in truth. This does not mean they give up on connection. In fact, they often crave it more than most. But they refuse to settle for imitation. They are willing to wait for one person who sees beneath the surface, who meets them without judgment, who speaks not just to their mind, but to their soul. Until then, they remain on the margins, not broken, not bitter, but quietly aware that the world is not made for minds that see everything. There is a darkness inside every human being, not evil in the way the world defines it, but a hidden force, untouched, unseen, often denied. Carl Jung called it the shadow, the part of the psyche that contains everything we refuse to see about ourselves. And for the deep thinker, that shadow is not merely an idea, it is a presence. Most people spend their lives avoiding the shadow. They distract themselves. They cling to routines, social identities, ideologies, anything to keep them from looking inward. But the deep thinker cannot avoid. Their mind turns inward by nature. It seeks truth, even when that truth threatens to unravel everything they thought they knew about themselves. This is where the beautiful illusion of thought becomes a dangerous terrain. At first, thinking seems safe, controlled, rational. But the deeper you go into your thoughts, the more you begin to uncover things that don't quite fit your self-image. You start to notice patterns, emotions that don't align with your values, reactions that seem disproportionate, dreams that disturb your waking mind. And then, one day, you realize your thoughts are not just thoughts. They are a door. And behind that door lies something ancient. Jung believed that the shadow is formed when aspects of ourselves, impulses, desires, emotions, are rejected by the conscious mind and pushed into the unconscious. Not because they are inherently wrong, but because society, parents, culture, someone somewhere, taught us that they were unacceptable. So we buried them, we silenced them. And now, years later, they speak back to us in the language of dreams, anxiety, and intrusive thoughts. For the deep thinker, this confrontation is inevitable. The very act of introspection leads them straight into the domain of the shadow. And what they find there is not always beautiful. It's anger they never allowed themselves to feel, envy they pretended didn't exist, arrogance hiding beneath humility, loneliness behind independence, and worst of all, fear. The fear that maybe they are not who they thought they were. The shadow doesn't scream. It whispers. It hides behind your judgments of others. It leaks through in your sarcasm, your projections, your emotional triggers. It sabotages your relationships, not because it wants to, but because it's begging to be seen. Jung warned that until we make the unconscious conscious, it will rule our lives, and we will call it fate. The deep thinker sees this, feels this, lives this. They realize that not all darkness comes from the world outside. Some of it lives within, and it is far more cunning. It disguises itself as morality, as certainty, even as love. But the thinker, in their relentless search for truth, begins to see the cracks in the mask. They follow the trail of discomfort back to its source. And when they arrive, they don't find monsters. They find themselves. This is not an easy revelation, it's shattering, because it forces them to let go of their self-constructed identity. It demands radical honesty. It forces them to say, yes, I am capable of that. Yes, that lives in me too. And once you admit that the world can never look the same again, the shadow is not simply a place of repression. It is also a place of power. All the parts of yourself you were taught to reject, your anger, your sensuality, your ambition, your sorrow, these are not flaws, they are energies. And when ignored, they fester. But when integrated, they transform. The deep thinker begins to understand that thinking alone is not enough. Insight without integration leads to fragmentation. You can know yourself intellectually, but still be a stranger to your own emotional truth. That's the danger of living only in the mind. It can become a refuge from the very shadow you're meant to confront. But once you begin to integrate what you find in the shadow, your thoughts change. They become grounded. They are no longer tools of avoidance, but bridges, connecting the conscious and the unconscious. You begin to notice the subtle alchemy occurring within you. The parts of you that once made you ashamed now become sources of strength. What once frightened you now humbles you. You realize that your darkness was never the enemy. It was simply misunderstood. The thinker evolves into something else. A watcher, a witness, a traveler of inner worlds. They no longer fear their thoughts because they know where those thoughts lead. Not into madness, but into transformation, into wholeness, into a deeper understanding of what it means to be human. And yet, this process is not linear. The shadow is not something you conquer. It is something you develop a relationship with. It visits you in new forms. It changes its shape. Just when you think you've faced it all, it returns with another lesson, another truth you're now ready to hold. Because your capacity to hold truth, real, uncomfortable, raw truth, grows each time you choose to look rather than run. There comes a point in the journey of every deep thinker when reflection alone is no longer enough. When the questions they've carried begin to demand answers, not just in theory, but in life. Carl Jung called this the process of individuation. The slow, often painful unfolding of the true self. It is not self-improvement. It is not polishing the ego to fit better into the world. It is the dismantling of illusion, the dissolving of the false identity, and the emergence of something real beneath it all. It begins in crisis. Not always dramatic or loud, but unsettling. A sense that something is off, a quiet ache, a growing dissonance between who you appear to be and who you feel you are beneath the surface. This dissonance is not dysfunction. It is a signal. The psyche is calling. And for the deep thinker, this call cannot be ignored. You start to question everything: your career, your values, your relationships, your very purpose. What once motivated you no longer holds meaning. What once gave you comfort now feels empty. And the more you resist this shift, the more unbearable life becomes. Because the mind can lie, but the soul cannot pretend forever. Jung believed that individuation is not a luxury, it is a necessity. Without it, the human psyche fragments. We become divided within ourselves, wearing masks to survive while secretly suffocating underneath. The deep thinker feels this fracture more intensely than most. They cannot settle for the surface. They cannot numb what they know is real. And so, they begin to walk the path few dare to tread. The path inward. This path is not lit with certainty. It is not paved with answers. It is a wilderness of contradictions, of inner voices that seem to argue with one another, of memories that resurface without warning. It demands solitude. It asks you to let go of applause, of identity, of the person you built to be accepted. And in that space of letting go, something ancient stirs. You begin to feel the stirrings of your true self, not the self shaped by society or trauma or expectation, the self that was there before the world told you who to be. This self is not always convenient. It doesn't always align with what others want from you. It might speak through art, through dreams, through a sudden urge to change direction. And when it does, the thinker must decide whether to listen or to return to the safety of the familiar. But safety has a cost. And for the deep thinker, cost is authenticity. So they go deeper. They follow the threads of instinct and intuition. They begin to reconnect with forgotten parts of themselves. Childhood wonder, suppressed anger, buried desires. These fragments were never lost. They were waiting to be acknowledged, integrated, made whole. This is not about becoming someone else. It is about becoming who you were before the world made you forget. Jung described this as uniting the conscious and the unconscious, bringing the shadow into dialogue with the light. It is a psychological alchemy. Every insight gained through pain becomes gold. Every confrontation with fear becomes a tool. Every tear, a cleansing of what no longer belongs to the soul. And yet, the world often resists this process. It prefers the predictable. It wants you to stay within the role it assigned you. The moment you begin to change, discomfort arises. Not just within you, but around you. People may misunderstand. They may accuse you of being distant, arrogant, unstable. But what they fail to see is that you are not breaking down. You are breaking open. This path requires courage. The courage to face the unknown within yourself. The courage to disappoint others in order to be true to yourself. The courage to walk alone. Not because you enjoy loneliness, but because truth rarely travels in crowds. There are moments of doubt. Moments when you question the journey, when the weight of awareness feels too heavy, when the silence feels unbearable. But still something inside urges you forward. Not ambition, not ego, but a quiet knowing that the life you are meant to live cannot be found by copying others. It must be carved from your own essence. You start to feel it, not all at once, but in glimpses, the inner alignment. The peace that comes not from avoiding pain, but from having survived it. The clarity that emerges after shedding illusion. The strength that was always there, buried beneath years of adaptation and fear. You begin to see yourself clearly, not as you wish to be, but as you truly are. And in this clarity, the thinker is no longer a prisoner of thought. They are no longer lost in endless analysis or paralyzed by their own depth. Their mind becomes an instrument of integration, not escape. Their sensitivity becomes a compass, not a burden. Their solitude becomes sacred, not sad. They are no longer defined by their suffering, but by what they've created from it. So now you see it. What lies beneath the quiet eyes, the thoughtful pauses, the soul that never stops observing. The deep thinker is not merely someone who thinks more. They feel more. They carry entire worlds within them. They explore the abyss of their own psyche. They suffer in silence, reflect in solitude, and bear the emotional weight most refuse to touch. They are haunted by what they understand, and yet blessed by what they see. They confront the shadow, wrestle with their own contradictions, and walk through the fire of their emotional overload, not to be destroyed by it, but to be shaped by it. Their alienation is not weakness. It is the cost of clarity. Their sensitivity is not a flaw. It is a doorway to the sacred, and their constant descent into the self is not madness. It is the slow soul forging path towards something rare, something real. Individuation. Becoming whole. The beautiful curse of the deep thinker is that they will never live on the surface. They will never be at home in illusion. They are pulled, sometimes against their will, into the truth of what it means to be human. But what begins as suffering eventually becomes transformation. And so, if you carry this weight, if you often feel too much, think too deeply, and live in a world that doesn't quite understand you, know this: you are not broken. You are not lost. You are simply on a path that few have the courage to walk. Let the world misunderstand you. Let them call it overthinking. Let them call it sensitivity. You are becoming something far more powerful than they know. You are becoming yourself.